All right, I'm Dave Erickson with ScreamingBox. Hopefully, you guys are enjoying our fun-filled pandemic hellscape of 2020 and virtual conferencing as it's now going to enter the new future. Anyways, I'm here to talk about how we manage remote developers, teams, and projects. Um, and what we're basically going to be going through is kind of the keys to remote management and teamwork, knowing the team requirements and qualifying team members, understanding how the teams work together and what tools and they're going to be using, type of communication, and how team leaders need to work with the various team members and the flexibility that is needed for remote work. To kind of give you a little bit of background on why we can talk about this, we started our company almost 8 years ago. We're entirely remote. We've always been a remote company, and we basically work up and down the West Coast, Los Angeles, San Francisco, and then our developers are spread throughout the world. And for us, our focus, or what makes us different than, say, a traditional development agency, is we really have focused on freelance developers. We don't have an office with a bunch of developers in it. We've been remote our entire career, our entire company. And the reason that we focused on freelance developers is for the flexibility, but also we're looking for very senior level developers, and a lot of those developers don't like to work in the traditional in-house type of role. And so that's the type of the developers we went after. And so it allows us to provide those type of services. So let's talk a little bit about what team assembly is like. The traditional standard has been in-house developers. A company hires a bunch of developers and puts them in a building and runs a development team. And that's a perfectly good normal, although in 2020 that's changing, and now there have in-house developers who are now in their homes working out of the house, and they're in some ways at a disadvantage because they were used to a much more structured kind of in-person setup. But those team assemblies still have to be done. Same with freelance developers. There are a lot of freelance developers and have been, and there's agency developers. So traditional agencies would basically have an office and they would have their developers in it, and they would run it like an in-house development team. And then there's hybrid, and a lot of companies are now using they would have their in-house developers, they would use some freelancers, or they would hand off some of the projects to agencies. And so those are the type of team assembly structures that have been in place. The team needs usually come down to what are the tech stacks of the developers, how is the project management done in order to keep the development velocity up. There's usually a whole section on DevOps and QA. And so assembling these teams is having an understanding of what this means. And for us as an agency, we do a lot of work with in-house teams. We actually do work for development agencies as well. We've had many combinations where we're working on projects where it's us, another agency, an in-house team, working together to build product. So for us and anybody else assembling a development team, it's really about the quality of the developers. And the quality of the team developers is critical. For us, our focus has been senior level developers. And so we really focus on looking at how do you verify and decide to work with a developer, add them to our team when you've never met them and it's completely remote. And there are different technologies that are out there to do kind of evaluation. we've kind of worked out over the last 8 years a process for us where we basically do kind of an HR check where we have a lot of motivation-based interviewing, remote interviewing, and talking about their background, and that motivation-based interview of a developer for a team is asking them what type of work do they want to do, because we're not really interested in, and most of the developers are not interested in doing work they're not very interested in. So we try to find out from people what work do they want to do, what type of work is interesting for them. And that's a key part of adding developers to a team, is to really understand that. And then we do obviously a lot of communication testing. English is our primary language, so we do a lot of verbal and written verification. And then we do technical assessment. And for us, there's some technologies out there to do technical assessment. We tend to have a lot of homework challenges done where they are coding challenges that can be done. It's a time challenge, usually 3 hours. And then we take a look at how they approach the problem solving. What does the code look like? And have one of our senior tech level developers evaluate that homework challenging. And then we usually put them on a trial project, either an internal project or one we're doing with the client, to shadow the project to see what they can do. And the other thing that we do that a lot of people don't do, we have our own personality behavior assessment, which is kind of a way of testing the developers to see what are their personalities like. What are their, are they introverted? Are they extroverted? Do they communicate in detail, or are they more creative and loose? And what are their workflows like? And how do they relate to other people? And this is a critical thing that when you're assembling a team is really important. Most of the teams that fail because of personality issues between team members or clients or other things. But anyways, once a developer gets through all that and is actually part of our team, we also have to train them for remote work skills and how to become kind of a team extension specialist, and also how to integrate with either in-house teams or teams that are already in process for work. And so team quality is really an important issue in assembling a team, and there's a lot that goes into that. Our team selection and our predictive behavior assessment, this is where we really go into, the testing of the personality. How do people work? What's their communication methods? What are their behavior tendencies? This is, again, really critical. If you have a team lead, a project manager, or a client who's very detailed oriented, but the actual work challenge requires creative developers, they tend to be a little bit more loose, not as detailed oriented. They communicate differently. You're going to have to make sure somebody in the team is able to have a personality that matches the client or matches the team lead or the product owner. And so this behavior assessment is really critical, and that's something we have found has led to a lot of the success of our projects. So remote communication work structure is people are finding out in-house teams that are now forced to work out of the house. The communications of that seem simple, but it actually can be very complex. There are many different communication platforms. Some people prefer to communicate either by video and not so much by chat or writing or Slack. Some people don't like to talk to people. They would rather just do it in chat and Slack. And so there's a whole mixture of that. But when you're putting together a team and working remote, you really need to kind of define what are the platforms and protocols. How is the communication going to be flowing between the project leads, the developers, and even the team within the development team, QA and DevOps? They all kind of have to have similar communication channels. And so the structure of the team needs to be clearly defined, even if that structure changes over the length of a project. It's very important to focus on communication protocols and who is doing what's the structure of the team, who talks to who about what. You would think these things are obvious, but they really do need to be defined at the beginning of any kind of project that a team is going to be working on. These collaboration tools are also important. There's a lot of different ones out there, and some people like others. And so when you have a team and you put together a team, you really do have to kind of work on what are going to be the channels of communication, who's going to be working on what's the team going to be having. Sometimes this is dictated by our clients who say this is what they like, and we have to have the team adjust to it. Other times we're allowed to do whatever we want. And so we have to set something up. Um, uh, a bunch of tools that when you're working with remote teams, we've had to basically build our own time management system to allow our developers who are very flexible and our clients to be able to work all the different types of weird hours and time zones, and how do they break up work and structure that work, which is very different for a lot of remote teams. We also, there are some AI tools that can help with some of the redundant work of communication and updating and other things. Robotic processing tools can also help as well, to put together a structure of communication and tools that allow the team to work well with the clients and the team leads. So flexibility in team management. We built our developer pool with freelancers for a very specific reason. One of those is flexibility of hours and workflows. We may build a team with 10 developers in it. A couple may work full time, a couple may work a couple hours. Some come into a project at the end, some come in at the beginning. Some projects get extended indefinitely, some projects get cut off. So we need a lot of flexibility. And so freelance developers tend to be trained with that flexibility or used to that flexibility. They tend to be very problem solving oriented. And so the service that we provide our clients is that of problem solving. We're not competing with kind of just hacking out code. There's lots of firms in India and other places that do that. We do a specific type of development where we're focused on invention, creation, solving problems in inventive ways. And so we have found that that requires a more consultative and kind of self-motivated personality type. And freelancers for us seem to fit that the best. We have had developers who worked in-house for many years and wanted to start freelancing. And we have to work with them to get them used to a more freelance kind of development lifestyle and way of approaching problems. But we tend to work mostly in that very flexible time frame. With remote teams, and all of our teams are remote, it's critical that the workflows are clearly defined and that the structure is defined and the leadership of the team is defined. Again, during a long project, this stuff changes, and that's okay. That's where the communication is important. But it is important that the team is very clear on what is the structure and who's the team leads. And the other thing with remote teams is really important. You don't have, like in an in-house situation, the structure of people just being able to walk up to each other and talk to each other, and they kind of get a feel for what's going on. So team leaders of a team that is remote really need to be able to read the client's needs and all the individuals, and they need to have the ability to talk personally with all the different teams and what they're feeling and how they're working and what needs to be done, almost like a consultant to each individual member. Hopefully that was helpful for anyone, and I'm more than happy to answer questions. I think we got like 10 minutes or so that I can do that. Um, Anybody have any questions or anything I can talk about with people? Okay, so someone's asking, any tip on getting entry-level job in this pandemic as a developer who graduated this year? Well, there are. We've occasionally taken on a developer who doesn't have a lot of experience, and we have worked with them to help them develop by giving them small roles in projects or having them work on some internal development. But the most important thing now is to get as much experience as possible. It's one of the things that freelance developers have the ability to do is they basically get a lot of different projects in a year, and so they can build up an experience base very quickly. So I would start doing that, looking for any type of little project to do and start adding it to your resume as quickly as possible. What is a simple AI tool that increases productivity for remote teams? I don't know if you would call it an AI tool, but Zapier can help, automate some manual processes as long as the things that you're using have an API that Zapier can hook into. You can kind of automate a few processes. There are some other software development tools that help developers automate some things that use some AI as well. So someone's asking the question, in the role of development leader, how can we create or promote an environment of innovation and cooperation in remote work? Well, this is really where the communication comes in. The team needs to feel like they are free to create, that they are free to suggest ideas, and so it takes a team leader who is very open to that and communicates with the team that they are free to give ideas. And I have many examples of projects where one of the team members just came up with a crazy idea, and when the team started looking at that idea, realized that was really the best way to go. That it was a creative solution, and we would take it back to the client, and the client would be like, "Wow, that's a great solution." So all the team members have something to contribute, even if it isn't in their tech stack. It could be that because, again, we're working more with freelance developers, they have a really wide range of experience. They can come up with some pretty creative and inventive suggestions. Obviously, the timing of these things in the development process are critical. But if a good team lead is working the team, and communicating with them and asking them what they're feeling and thinking, they will get really good ideas. All right, someone wrote, I'm doing remote work for the last 4 years, lacking of communication, even though you think you're communicating well, sometimes causes issues. How do you approach this? Well, there's two aspects of communication that we are focused on. So one of them is it doesn't matter how well you think you're communicating. Your personality and the way that you communicate may be different than the other person's. And that's one of the reasons why we do a lot of personality assessment. That's our PBA, personality behavior assessment process. It's because we're trying to find out. I mean, if you have a person who is doing development and they are very detailed oriented, and the client is very creative and not detailed oriented and not specific, there's going to be a lot of communication problems between them because they're communicating in two different ways. And they may not even understand or realize that the difference exists. And so that is one barrier. So understanding at a deep level the personality of who you're communicating with is really important. And if you don't have that understanding, you may need to take some time to really have a conversation with the person you're trying to talk to, whether it's a client or another developer. Hey, how do you like to communicate are you comfortable doing it this way? Are you detailed oriented? Are you, more creative or free flowing? And so that's a really important aspect of communication. The other, particularly with remote teams, is time zones and delay, because people may be working. Example, if you're on the West Coast of the United States dealing with a developer in Europe, most of our developers are in Europe. There's you get to talk in the morning, and then in the afternoon they're sleeping, or some of them are. Some of them work all night and then they sleep during the day. It depends on how they like to work. There may be some delays in communication. That's one of the things to consider in teams. We tend to build teams where we also have developers in the time zone of the client as well as our other developers to help facilitate that kind of communication. Um, and so that's really important. But yes, it's really important to understand the other person, to understand how you communicate, and to create a situation where the communication flows very smoothly. And then another question is, how do you as a manager not micromanage on one hand and yet be involved on the other? Yeah, it's really difficult. The worst thing you can have is say, a client who's a developer who wants to micromanage a team. Um, there's a line between micromanaging and having a deep understanding of how the developers are developing, and it's easy to kind of cross that line. Um, you want to be able to trust the development team to do the development, and to have a team leader who's able to coordinate the development and manage the developers in a way that doesn't create friction within the team because they think that they're being micromanaged. Um, it is really a careful balance, and we work very hard, especially with our clients. Some clients want to be very hands-on and manage the developers, very detailed, join every daily stand-up and get involved. Other clients are not as hands-on, and we have to work with all kinds. Someone asked a question, are introverted people dismissed for remote work? No, actually not. Introverted people are actually very important. They have their own personality characteristics. For us, we try to build a team that has as much variety in it as possible. Um, Introverted developers are usually very detailed oriented, very focused. They tend to communicate very clearly because they're looking to have as little communication as possible. So they're very detailed oriented and information packed. And those are very important qualities to have on a team. Just like we want to have extroverted people on the team, because someone's going to have to be out there being vocal and communicating with clients and other members. The best teams and the strongest teams have that variety. If we had a team that was all extroverts, it would have its own issues. Just like if we had a team that was all introverts, it would have its own issues. The best is a mix, so you need to have both. Um, all right, let's see. The last question, I think, is how do we practice coercion in remote work? Cohesion, sorry. How do we practice cohesion in remote work? That's a skill set that has been learned over many years. And the best teams, again, that cohesion really is about making sure that everybody understands their personalities and the way they work and the way they like to work, and making sure that the developers are doing the type of work they like to do, and to create an atmosphere, an environment where people can talk freely. That generates the best cohesion. Um, so one of the another question is, how do you go about further improving your remote work hiring and environment? What works best? Well, we've, like I said, we have a pretty defined process that we've developed over 7 years. We welcome any developer to come to us and apply to our pool. We don't accept that many. I think we're like maybe 10% of all the developers that we work with actually go through and pass all of our evaluations, our homework challenges, our coding challenges. But we're very focused on a very senior level type of developer. But other teams, they may have other needs, and they have to adjust their qualification and hiring practice for the level of developers that they are looking for as well. Uh, if anybody has any questions about how we work or how we hire people or the type of developers that we work with, or how they could have their own teams or practices for remote development, please contact us. We'd be more than happy to talk to anyone about these subjects.